closely tied to it. However, Black Pigeon Speaks would have been unlikely to notice this because he already has some rather particular notions about Sweden.
The signs of decline are already observable. While many countries are sliding into social decline, the canary in the coal mine is the self-described humanitarian superpower that pursues a feminist foreign policy. When looking at Sweden, it's one of the most gender-equal countries on Earth. And while they've become the rape capital of Europe, they're flushing their culture and country down the toilet and pressing forward in their civilizational suicide at an ever-accelerating pace.
So, Sweden as the rape capital of Europe. They've let all the immigrants in, and now they're going around raping everyone. Is any of this true? Well, Sweden does have the highest amount of reported rapes in Europe. However, this is not necessarily a bad thing. Stay with me now. In fact, Sweden's high amount of reported rapes relative to the rest of Europe is in some respects a good thing. And if you're wondering how this could be, the key is in the word reported. So let's think about this a bit more. For starters, the idea that Sweden's relatively high number of reported rapes is linked to some recent migrant influx is countered by the fact that Sweden has, for a very long time, not just recently, had a relatively high number of reported rapes relative to Europe. The Wikipedia article on rape in Sweden says, in 1996, Sweden registered almost 3 times the average number of rape offences registered in 35 European countries. So unless these recent migrants have time machines, I don't think we can say they're solely to blame for Sweden's high number of reported rapes. So if it's not down to recent migration, why is Sweden at the number 1 spot? Well, for starters, Sweden has sex crime legislation that has one of the most expansive definitions of rape in the world. More things are classed as rape in Sweden on average than in the rest of Europe. And this brings up an interesting point. It's very difficult to compare crime rates across countries that use different definitions of the crime. For example, and quoting Wikipedia again here, unlike the majority of countries in Europe, crime data in Sweden are collected when the offence in question is first reported, at which point the classification may be unclear. In Sweden, once an act has been registered as rape, it retains this classification in the published crime statistics, even if later investigations indicate that no crime can be proven, or if the offence must be given an alternative judicial classification. And I'd like to ask a question here. Let's say a woman goes to the police and says her husband has raped her every night for the last month. Now, how would you record that crime? Do you record that as one instance of rape but happening repeatedly, or 30 separate rape crimes? Now, depending on how you record it in the crime statistics, that's a difference of 30 times. And of course, the Swedish police record every individual instance of rape as a separate offence. My point is that 2 countries using 2 different methods of collecting crime data could have wildly different crime statistics even if the actual number of crimes is identical. And also, by the way, a country that actively encourages people to come forward and report rape to the police will have a higher instance of reported rapes. But that's good. That's what they want to happen. I mean, consider the alternative. In 2010, an Amnesty International report highlighted that sexual violence happens in every single country, and yet the official figures show that some countries like Hong Kong and Mongolia have 0 cases reported. And that's from a BBC article about the rape statistics in Sweden. Now, I would ask anyone blaming migrants for Sweden's relatively high number of reported rapes if they think that nobody was ever raped in Hong Kong or Mongolia because, and I'm guessing here, I imagine that is probably not the case. Anyway, that BBC article I quoted just there actually offers a very good explanation of the various ways in which crime statistics can vary from country to country. As a comparison, they show that Australia and Canada have a vastly above average number of kidnappings, more than Colombia and Mexico, but this isn't because Australia, for example, actually has more kidnappings than Mexico. The disparity is explained by the different ways each country classifies and records the crime. And I quote, "So why haven't we heard any of these horror stories? Are people being grabbed off the street in Sydney and Toronto while the world turns a blind eye? No. The high numbers of kidnapping cases in these two countries are explained by the fact that parental disputes over child custody are included in the figures. If one parent takes a child for the weekend and the other parent objects and calls the police, the incident will be recorded as a kidnapping. Comparing crime rates across countries is fraught with difficulties. This is well known among criminologists and statisticians, less so among journalists and commentators.